evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. I'm delighted to introduce my guest today, Dr. Bruno Verdini, who is a visiting professor at the Asia School of Business, also the author of the book Winning Together. Now, he joins us today to break down how negotiation frameworks can help leaders negotiate effectively, particularly in a politically charged environment. So, Dr. Verdini, welcome to the show. It's good of you to join me today. You've spent years studying and advising on high-stakes negotiations worldwide, but I think for many of us, we see negotiation as either an innate talent or something that is learned through experience, rather than a structured discipline that can be taught or mastered. How do we think about that? Why would you say negotiation is a skill that needs to be taught, learned, and mastered?
Well, Melissa, thank you very much for inviting me in the home of your audience. Negotiation is indeed both an art and a science. The art and science of communication and diplomacy, of figuring out what you want to think about, what you want to say, what you want to do. So it's the exploration of moral compass of what you stand for. Certainly, we all negotiate from the moment we're born. Mm. Your audience quite well knows, if they have children, that your children take no for an answer. They never take no for an answer, and they always ask why. They're curious, they're not judgmental, they're open to figure out and discover the world. And a good negotiator does that. Even though, transactionally speaking, a lot of people think that the world is win-lose, the science and the study that I've been fortunate to do for the last 15 years at MIT, and that I'm happy to continue to do as a visiting professor as well at the Asia School of Business, tries to empower stakeholders across all domains, from young undergraduates to heads of government, on the skills to be able to advocate more effectively about how to create more value in this world.
Mm. Can you talk a little bit more, elaborate a bit more about how negotiations apply, or negotiation skills and frameworks apply to leadership, to governance, to policy making? I'm speaking about all the decision makers who may watch the show and think, oh, how do I apply this to my field of expertise?
Well, obviously, everybody who has a position of leadership in a society not only is responsive in a way to their shareholders or stakeholders, but every time they're sitting in a table, they have to make a decision about how the virtues they believe in are going to shape the collaboration, the exploration of the pieces of a puzzle that will make it work or create victory speech not only for them but for the other side. And if you take your responsibility much more seriously, spiritually speaking, then for the people who are not sitting at the table but are going to be impacted by the decisions you make, which is often missing in this world. Mm. Certainly, there's not a problem. We have a host array of human beings who are able to find power to serve themselves or the group they associate with themselves. But an effective leader and negotiator uses their virtue to uplift those who will never have a chance to sit at the table, but whose your decision impact or transform their life. So that's the focus of the research we do and the trainings we develop.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience? You have been involved in some high-stakes negotiations. You played a significant role in resolving a protracted dispute between the US and Mexico about natural resources. So talk to me a little bit about that experience and what challenges you faced during those negotiations.
Well, one of the reasons why I've enjoyed for the last few years coming at least twice per year to Malaysia in different partnerships is I was born and raised in an emerging economy, in this case Mexico, and in a multicultural family. My dad is French and Italian, my mom is Mexican, he's Lutheran, my mom is Catholic. And so when eventually I decided to, through hard work and through the fellowships I earned, to go to the United States and study there at MIT, I made the pitch, and this will be the explanation, I made the pitch that you needed, I negotiated with MIT to create a PhD in negotiation because I felt that an interdisciplinary outlook on conflict resolution was necessary. So not only should we study strategies of negotiation and mediation, but also we should study the psychology of persuasion. How do you run a debate or an ad? We should also study adaptive leadership and the frameworks that govern deep introspection. And we definitely should explore foreign affairs, not only international diplomacy, but in the world now where most corporations have more financial resources than entire nations, what will be the path of corporate diplomacy? In the research that I've done for the last 10 years, one of the focus has been natural resource management, because it's a fantastic domain. Not only do you have to navigate, therefore, the economic and political stakeholders, how can they get on the same page, but in addition, you need nature to play ball, and nature doesn't care that you sold a good ad. It actually needs to make sense in terms of the law of nature. And so I find when you're dealing with environmental, energy, water resources, that this is a domain where people have to manifest their very best skills. And my research has been interviewing heads of government and also the technical managers. How can we piece together side by side the steps and behaviors that move you away from mistrust and conflict, and instead resolve decade-long battles when you're facing imbalances of power? Because at the end of the day, it's our mindset, our interpretation of the situations, what determines what we can produce or not.
Can you explain? So I think there's a traditional perception going into negotiations that there are trade-offs, there are winners and losers, it is a zero-sum game. Can you explain your philosophy, negotiation philosophy?
Sure, it's both a philosophy and a science, in the sense that, first of all, if you're brought in to work with any stakeholder, and be fortunate to do so with decision makers at the C-suite level from across more than 80 countries in this world. Okay, so I'm not talking about only a view that makes sense in the academic hallways. Rather, if you're talking about negotiation leadership, it must have a real life impact in the world. Yeah. In that sense, you begin, first of all, with questioning why do you approach life with a scarcity mindset, with a negativity bias? In which ways does it help you to problem solve? You know, if you approach a situation or a conflict from the perspective that it's either me or you, not surprisingly, that's the outcome that you produce. But to resolve conflicts, you have to reshape your view of negotiation as hopping into a boxing ring to defeat the opponent, into instead, how am I, let's say, engaging in a melody, in a dance, where with the counterpart I realize the larger piece of the puzzle that we're missing through the sequence of steps that we take to engage authentically and address the problems we have at hand. And so the science of negotiation and conflict resolution is one that dives deep into the psychology of how we human beings see ourselves. That's why at the beginning I was saying it's about what you think, what you say, and what you do. And mystically speaking, many Sufi masters would have said so. Therefore, you're discussing what you think would be the light, what you say would be the life, and what you do would be the love. And can we have leaders that have the guts and courage to demonstrate that in how they mentor and in how they engage socially, economically, politically?
What does engage authentically look like? Especially if leaders who are going into negotiations are dealing with deeply entrenched positions, right? Opposing interests. It could be in business, it could be in politics, it could be in diplomacy. What does engaging authentically look like? What does genuine collaboration look like?
Brilliant. Well, I'll give an example from my book. You mentioned Winning Together, the Natural Resource Negotiation Playbook. I interviewed 70 stakeholders on the Mexico and on the US side, from presidents to technical managers. And one of the case studies is on the Colorado River. The significance of the river is strong. It serves more than 40 million people in both countries, and some of the most fertile agricultural lands in both places, right? And the two countries had a binational agreement since the 1940s that allocates the water of the river between the two nations at specific moments of each year. But given mistrust between the stakeholders on both sides, they did not develop the sense of collaboration that you're asking for decades. And so when climate change became an apparent challenge, climate risks, let's call them, the stakeholders on the US side, the 7 basin states, which are Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, California, and Arizona, they said, you know what, we need to collaborate to reduce the amount of water we use annually. And we also therefore need to go and negotiate with Mexico how to reduce the allocation that we give them. Of course, the Mexican president, when they knocked on his door, was like, well, if I negotiate such a deal, it's a very hard deal to sell politically. So this is from a win-lose perspective. So the feedback from Mexico was, we should negotiate a deal that also allocates surpluses. Now, picture they interview at the Secretary of the Interior, the Secretary of State, and the Americans. At first glance, they said, well, the Mexicans are crazy. With climate risks coming our way and less water availability, we can't negotiate surplus and shortages. We can only negotiate shortages. However, because the two countries had not trusted each other enough, the Americans had never been invited to visit the canals on the Mexico side that carry the water. Those canals were not lined with concrete. Since they were not lined with concrete, a significant amount of the water is lost due to seepage and evaporation. Well, in this occasion, after 7 decades of conflict, actually the American stakeholders were invited to visit the canals. And they realized, well, if we propose to line the canals with concrete and the Americans pay for that construction, then all of a sudden we have water availability that no Mexican stakeholder is yet using. It was lost due to seepage and evaporation. What if they sell us a percentage of that water back at Mexican ratepayer prices, which are much lower than US ratepayer prices? And in that case, we do negotiate a surplus. Mexico has more water, the US has more water, they have more water at a lower price, and we don't have to take water rights on the US side. That's how you turn win-lose into win-win.
So was it just a matter of rebuilding that trust, or just having them come and visit and to see for themselves?
Yes, the magical recipe is simply to move away from our choice of an adversarial approach to negotiation, assuming that that works out. No, it reduces the maneuvering room of your colleague, of your counterpart. On the contrary, if you build trust, you find solutions because now you have a larger piece of the puzzle, and therefore you can create synergies through trade-offs.
But that trust doesn't materialize from nowhere. It doesn't come organically. It has to be, there has to be a conscious decision to trust, because trust is often the casualty in politically charged environments. How do you rebuild trust that was lost or eroded by decades of mistrust or past policies or conflicts?
Through both pedagogy and strategy. Pedagogy, certainly by the work that any top institution will do, in this case in Malaysia, the Asia School of Business, in their partnership with MIT's Long Global Programs. Part of the focus is you develop executive education programs that are tailor-made for the challenges that a specific organization, political or economic, is trying to address. And then you develop a set of pedagogical activities to draw from within your stakeholders and ability. And there I call on the fact that education, in its Latin etymology, educo, means to draw from within. So when you educate, you're trying to unlock doors in people's abilities to relate with the world. So now I move into the examples you ask. If you are in a position, let's say you're the Secretary of State, and then you're the Ambassador of Mexico in the US, and you want to change a history of mistrust and confrontation, you have to decide to move away from the counter-draft cycle of traditional diplomatic negotiations. Country A tells country B, here's our list of demands. Obviously, country B receives them and says, no, 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 no. Here's our counter list of demands. If you start negotiations in such a way, confrontationally, it's unlikely you'll produce good outcomes. However, and it's a part of what we've studied and produced, if instead you say, before we start negotiating, for a few weeks, let's jointly, our two nations, identify experts on subjects. They need not be from Mexico or the US. What subjects are we going to be negotiating? Together we pick the rosters from around the world. We're going to negotiate transboundary hydrocarbon agreements. Let's find the best experts. Let's have a few workshops in Washington, D.C., Mexico City, Cancun, New Orleans. Let's have some good food, interact informally. Understand what we're going to negotiate around. And then once we sit down, our roadmap will differ. Now, this is not just theory. I'll give an example. In my research, we studied that around the world, the average that it takes to negotiate a transboundary hydrocarbon agreement, therefore involving 2 or 3 countries, is more than 5 years. Mexico and the US, though they trade $1 million per minute, and Mexico is the most important trading partner of the United States. 2023, they traded more than $400 billion. The two nations had not taken the step in this dynamic to therefore have any partnership on hydrocarbons agreements, because they ditched the counter-draft cycle and they actually did the workshop first. They negotiated an agreement in less than a year and a half. I think that's a lot of savings for the taxpayer.
By
starting with the workshop instead of starting with the draft versus the draft. 1.5 years versus 5 years to get on the same page.
Why?
Because you're no longer adversarial about the subjects. When one nation says, I can't do that, you know that it's no longer a ploy or a subterfuge. You literally study the subject first, and you understand that a move in that direction or that direction is not something that the nation can do. Because you've had the wisdom, the humility to understand more about the subject matter and where this one side or the other has maneuvering room. Which, by the way, you were highlighting where there's a lot of contrast or conflict. People negotiate through the media. If you do that, you reduce the maneuvering room of your counterpart, because they no longer can save face when they change an approach to a situation. If indeed I come into a negotiation so certain that my view of the world is the one that is right, and I just need the other side to rubber stamp it, then I'm sorry to say to many leaders, that's not a negotiation. That is, if I don't have the ability to walk away, if I don't have other alternatives, that's not a negotiation. A true negotiation is a situation where we co-create the outcome. If the outcome is not better than my alternatives, then I shouldn't sign on it. So a negotiation process inevitably, inherently, well understood, requires the ability for you to challenge your blind spots, challenge your assumptions, and on the basis of that, behave differently. Then you ask for the same reciprocity from the other side, because unless they do that, they may not realize that their original solution is not as good as the one you can create together.
So in this, through this explanation, a lot of the contemporary examples are not true negotiations. They're just playing chicken through the media.
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, no, not surprisingly, if you think about democratic processes, in a way, they're structured in such a way that you run for office telling, you know why I should be in power? Because use any adjective on the other side, can't solve the problems. I should. So it's a system where you blame faults on the others. It self-selects for human beings who often have the ability to blame somebody else for the problems, unable to actually build the right strategic alliances to actually, hey, once the battle has ended, let's all put our minds together to move forward. And so that approach self-selects for a certain ego personality that doesn't produce a lot of good outcomes. In the long run, for the larger society that is inevitably impacted by our choices, who we consider adversaries and who we consider friends.
Does that also apply to businesses when there's profit motivations? When I think about, how companies and, say, governments clash over regulation, clash over labor rights, over taxation, are there different dynamics at play there as well?
Spiritually speaking, there are not. Economically speaking, there can be. Okay. Spiritually speaking, the choice remains that any organization could decide to measure success in an array of ways and still find a way to highlight that success in response to shareholder value. A lot of the work we do at the AHS School of Business, and certainly in the partnership with MIT's Lone Global programs, if we want to make the world a better place, how can we price into our measure of success a holistic understanding of the impact of our industry in a certain environment? So it doesn't hurt you to become wiser about how can you have the right supply chain, how can you have the right leadership system, how can you build the right strategic alliances to navigate a pandemic so that people's jobs are supported, shareholder value is respected, and you can thrive economically. There's no doubt that there's a competition in this world on different approaches, but I've seen no proof that the win-lose approach solves more problems. It only makes them worse.
There's also so when we think about negotiating, it's not just about negotiating external deals. You have to negotiate internal deals. And you talked about like who anyone who's been a parent, or we do this in our personal lives as well. We negotiate in the home, we negotiate in the workplace, we negotiate, in the halls of Putrajaya about internal resource management. How do we most effectively use whatever resources we have, be it time, be it money, be it capital or talent? When you think about that, I want to do this with the money we have, but you don't want to do that, and then we negotiate. How do you come to the table and strategize that? Let's take a national view, for instance. We have just this much money in our federal coffers, and there are 1 million projects and reforms we want to do, but we don't have the ability to do them all. How, as a policymaker, do you do you allocate effectively your resources?
There's always a mission to differentiate whether to do something and how to do it. The whether to do something in any democracy, and certainly is the case of Malaysia as a democracy, the responsibility is to figure out what is the mandate that I want to explain to the voters and to the generations that don't vote but will be impacted by our policies, that I think best serves them. And what is the umbrella of stakeholders and insights that I'm going to put together in a coalition to, little by little, create a system that enhances the life of a majority rather than a minority. That process, therefore, is a choice. In the same way that at home you make a choice about which virtues or principles or strengths you want the people you love to follow. And that's a choice of example. It is the eternal challenge all souls face, to figure out what they want to use their time for.
Malaysia is chair of ASEAN this year, and I think it's a precarious time because countries have diverging interests in areas like Myanmar, like the South China Sea, for instance, human rights. What strategies would you like to see Malaysia employ in terms of finding common ground and authentically engaging and fostering genuine collaboration with countries who operate and think so differently from us?
I will never have the arrogance to tell Malaysia what to do, but I do have the blessing.
Some advice then, maybe.
I do have the blessing and the honor now for many years to work collaboratively, closely with Bank Negara Malaysia and many other institutions, both in the public and the private sector. And when I brought in the responsibilities to create pedagogical experiences for the talent that exists in such a multicultural, multi-spiritual society as yours, to really identify the threats that you find most important. And so in my experience working at the Asia School of Business, in the conversations with government stakeholders here in Malaysia, I found an enormous array of people who are committed to uphold the leadership role that your country has in Islamic finance, well beyond ASEAN. I mean, the role that Bank Negara occupies. And so I know that there's a spirit of collaboration and warmth at the heart of how you conceive of leadership. I've experienced it. I would recommend that you take advantage of the cold draft going on in other parts of the world and you lead with your spirit. I think you'll get a lot of allies as a result of that.
Okay, having said that, having alluded to that, if you look ahead for the rest of the year, for 2025, what do you think are the, I wouldn't use threats, but emerging challenges that you foresee for leaders worldwide?
To understand that even if your time in office will conclude at some point in this 2020, when you think about the opportunity to be a C-suite leader, to be a CEO, to be a head of government, you have the unique opportunity to use your power, let's say, to pick up a phone call and say, you know, I'm really concerned about cancer. Can we build the best team together so that we address it? I mean, that there's a recognition of the legacy that you're responsible for and how few souls on earth, when you do the math, their choice is how can I make the world a better place? Most souls, actually, their challenge is, will I be able to eat tomorrow? So if you've been given the blessing through your talent to lead environments, take it seriously, make a difference, own it.
Dr. Verdini, thank you so much for being on the show with me. It's joy talking to you.
Thank you, Melissa, the same.
That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.